Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing great this week. Hope you're having a good week. Hope things are going well. So, just to jump right into it, we've been going through Acts in order of events of what happened from the time that Jesus was resurrected, what we would call Easter, the start of the church, and all that. So, if you've seen any of my other videos or been following along, you know that. We're at Acts chapter 15 in this week's lesson and just kind of the events that happened. So, just to recap, previously in the last couple chapters, Paul, who was Saul, who was a really bad guy, but then was converted through the Lord, he and Barnabas have been out on missionary journeys, starting churches, taking the gospel, just the good news about Jesus, a long way. Not all over, but in several places, several different cities. We've talked about how they faced some adversity in those cities, how they were run out of many of them, how they were, at one point, Paul was stoned, which means they threw rocks at him until they thought he was dead. Um, and so in chapter 14, which is where we left off last week, they kind of got to a point and then turned around and came back, checking on all the places they went, and they ended up back in Antioch, which is where they started their journey. So, in chapter 15, we read about there's some men who come down to Antioch and they're teaching about Jesus, which is good, and they're doing many things, but um, they're telling people unless you do these certain things, specifically a thing called circumcision. I'm not going to tell you what that is. If you need to know, ask your parents. But when circumcision was introduced in the Bible, it was something that Jewish men did to show that they were different than everyone else. That they follow God. It was something that God put out, and it was for them. All right. So, these men that came down to Antioch, and they're not Paul and Barnabas, they are telling people that unless they are circumcised, which it's only men that can be circumcised, if that tells you anything, unless they are circumcised, they cannot be saved, which is false. That's an old Jewish thing that Jesus took away. And so many of these people are following through with it, and there's people who don't want to do it. It's a big deal, okay? And just leave it at that. It's a mess. And so what they end up doing is they have like a council meeting with all the church leaders, all the apostles, and all them. And there's an argument, there's a dispute on if that's true or not, if they should require people to be circumcised to be Christians. And what they come up with in this meeting is no. We should not require non-Jewish people to be circumcised because that is not salvation. When Jesus Christ came, he brought salvation to all, and he tells us that salvation is ours through him by believing in him and by following his teachings. Specifically by loving others, by being kind, by being generous, helping other people, stop doing bad, stop doing things that are against God. You follow him and you do for him and believe in Jesus, and that's where how we get our salvation. It's through Jesus. It's not through some act that we do to our bodies. So what the council decides, and they put it in a letter, they tell these people, these new churches from different backgrounds, these are the things that you need to do. Hang on a second. You are to abstain from eating food that was sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. If you avoid these things, that's good. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds strange. We don't practice in our world or in America sacrifices anymore. But back then, they would have these false gods, these temples set up to all kinds of different things. And one way you would worship them is by sacrificing food to them. And it was like a big ceremony, and it was a big thing. And so what they're saying is, hey, if these people are worshiping another god by sacrificing this food, we shouldn't eat it. As Christians, we should abstain. We should stay away from these sacrifices altogether, but we definitely shouldn't partake in the celebration or the worship of another god, even though we're not worshiping. And then it says from blood, from meat from strangled animals, from sexual immorality. Now, like the blood and the meat from strangled animals, again, that was a cultural thing. That was something that was pertained kind of more back then. It's not really a subject that we have to deal with now. Sexual immorality is. That's when people are doing things that they shouldn't be with other people. And so to stay away from those things. So believe in Jesus, follow him, follow his teachings, listen to the apostles, the people who start in the church. Do good, be kind, love others. Stay away from these things. They're not good. Those are the only things that we're asking you to change about your culture, about who you were. Okay? Other than like not following false gods. You don't have to be circumcised. You don't have to follow Jewish customs and holidays and things. Those are for Jewish people. Jewish people are still around today. They still follow many of these customs. They have different holidays. They have different beliefs. They have different rituals and things like that. So to be a Christian and to be saved, to have salvation, you don't have to be Jewish and you don't have to follow Jewish customs. That's good, because I would say that almost all of us, none of us are Jewish. And so therefore, we don't have to follow the Jewish customs to receive salvation. Our salvation comes from Jesus Christ, the same as theirs. But as you know, if they want to still celebrate in that way, then they can. So that's the first part of chapter 15. It's about the council and the meeting and this disturbance that's going on. And there's some people who are saying you have to do this, and some people saying no. And they come to this agreement, and they write it in a letter, and they send it out with all kinds of people, and they spread the word, basically. And people who are hearing this are excited because they didn't want to have to do those things. They're not Jewish. And then we come to the last little part of chapter 15. Now, Paul and Barnabas had been missionaries. They went out together. They'd started churches. They had, spread the word. They had done many things. But then we read about in verse 36 where they have a disagreement. And their disagreement is this. I'll read it to you. It says, sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, let's go back and visit the brothers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. So Paul wants to go back and check on the churches that they started and see how things are going, see how they're doing, see if there's ways that they can help, new teachings, things like that. Barnabas thinks that's a good idea. Yeah, we hadn't been. Let's go back. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them. But Paul did not think it was wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. Now, when these guys go on their journeys, it's not just them two. There's people that go with them. There's a whole group of people that travel together. And we read about this. We kind of glanced over it a few chapters back when they first started their missionary journey. Mark, left. And apparently Paul really had issue with that. We don't know why Mark left. We're not told that. We don't know, what the issue was. But for Paul to have such an issue with it, it seems like maybe Mark was scared or nervous or just wanted to quit. He didn't like what they were having to go through. Um, it wasn't a legitimate reason like, hey, my mom's sick and I gotta go take care of her or something like that. It seems like Paul felt like he abandoned them, and he didn't like that. And I would venture to say he didn't trust him anymore. He didn't. It wasn't that he hated the guy or anything like that. I'm sure if they saw each other, Paul was nice to him, but he didn't trust him to go do the work that they were going to do. He didn't trust him to go through the things that they were going to have to go through. The persecutions and the trials and the struggles and I guess Paul was thinking he's going to quit again. He's going to leave. And so they had such a disagreement that Paul and Barnabas split up. They go separate ways. They both continue in the work. They both continue to spread the gospel. But Paul does not want Mark to go with him. Now, a little side note, Mark, he's an author. He's a scribe. He writes down what's going on, and he writes one of the Gospels, the book of Mark. So even though Paul didn't necessarily trust him and didn't want him to go, Mark still did good, and he still went with them, and he obviously matured beyond his time of quitting. So we find out that Barnabas took Mark, and he goes to Cyprus, and Paul chose Silas, and they went through Syria and other places, checking on the people. Now, that kind of, Paul just, I think, was a pretty headstrong guy. He was pretty determined, and he didn't have time to waste on people who didn't get it, didn't understand, who might quit, who might leave him. He needed the people to be secure. He needed the people to be all in what they were doing, and he didn't feel that Mark was that. Now, it doesn't say that they fussed and fought and drug each other through the mud and called each other names, and it just said that, look, they couldn't agree on it. They didn't, and instead of trying to force it and make it work, they just said, look, you go do your thing, I'll go do my thing. We're still working for the Lord. We're still doing good stuff. It's just better that if you want to take Mark, you go your way, and I'll take Silas and go my way, and we'll still be friends, and we'll still get along, and so forth. But that's about the last we hear of Barnabas mentioned here. He continues to do the work. He's not one of the main characters anymore. Barnabas was the guy that vouched for Paul after Paul's conversion, and because of that, because of Barnabas, this is good word for Paul, people believed that he had changed and stuff. And so they're good guys. They're still good friends. Like they had a disagreement, but in a godly way. They didn't fuss and fight and sin and carry on and say bad things about each other. And we can learn a lesson from that. People disagree. People aren't always going to agree on everything. That's what makes us human. We're not all the same. We all have different interpretations of things. We all have different ways of doing stuff. And it's okay to not be like other people. And it's okay to disagree on things. And it's okay to choose to, the saying is agree to disagree. For Paul, this was a big deal. And they found that it was better for them to just separate and continue the work than to be mad at each other. And so that's what happens. So Paul sets out on his new journey. We would call this his second missionary journey. Same thing, he's going out and starting churches, and he's continuing to do the good work. So for us, we have to continue to do the good work too. We have to continue to be to try to follow the Lord the best we can. Loving others and showing kindness, using our words appropriately. Not just sometimes we get carried away with what we say, and even if we say something we shouldn't, we think, oh, I'm sorry. If we say that, then that makes it all better. And the truth is you can't take words back. And once you say something, those words have been said. Now, you might can apologize and you might can make things better, but the words have been said and the damage has been done. And so as Christians, we have to be very careful with what we say and how we talk to people and how we treat other people. And again, I'm not saying that we have to agree with everybody. I'm not saying we have to get along with everybody. But there is a right way to disagree. There is a right way to not get along with people. And by that I mean, like, we still love others. We still care for other people. We just may not fully agree with everybody. Okay, that doesn't give us permission to be ugly. It doesn't give us permission to say bad things. It doesn't give us permission to gossip or any of that stuff. It's important that we continue to do what's right, even in disagreeing. So I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a good week. I miss seeing you guys, and maybe we can get together in person soon. But until then, I'll see you on the next video.